Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I hope everybody had a really awesome Thanksgiving weekend or a long weekend, at least here in America. I'm hoping everybody had just a decent weekend in general around the world. So I wanted to talk about a new book that I just read on this Minisode. It is called Lute. It is by Jennifer Thorne. It is a Wicker Man meets Final Destination, allegedly. It's a folk horror novel, and I believe this is kind of her debut horror novel for adult readers. I'm going to be really upfront with everybody. I genuinely did not like the book. I liked the foundation of the book. I liked the idea of the story. I did not like the execution of the story. And I will get into that as well. And I will probably, in order to kind of talk more about that, I might slip in a few spoilers and I'll make sure to note that. But let me just talk about that. Just because I don't like the book doesn't mean other people will feel the same way. I do encourage people to just go out on their own and have their own opinion about each thing. In fact, a lot of people do enjoy this book. But for me, something I'm noticing also, just to tack this thought onto my current one, is that almost every single Tor Nightfire book I have read this year has not jived with me, and I don't know what it is. The one book that I did really, really love was Dead Silence, but it had a few things in there that could have been omitted. But so far, almost every Tor book I have read this year has just been a huge bummer. And I don't know what it is. Maybe I just need to forego reading Tor novels. I don't know. Maybe I'm not their audience. Anyway, so let's talk about Jennifer Thorne first. So she's an American author for YA and adult reads. She lives in Minchinhampton, along with her husband, 2 sons, and a lot of other animals. She was born in Tennessee. She studied drama at NYU. Some books that she's done are The Wrong Side of Right, which is a YA novel. We also have The Inside of Out, Night Music, and a picture book called The Construction Zoo. So Lute is her first horror novel that she's done, and this is for adult readers. And I think it might actually be her first adult novel as well. So let me just summarize Lute. On the idyllic island of Lute, every 7th summer, 7 people die. No more, no less. Lute and its inhabitants are blessed year after year with good weather, good health, and good fortune. They live a happy, superior life, untouched by the war that rages all around them. So it's only fair that every 7 years, on the day of the tithe, the island's gift is honored. Nina Treadway is new to the day. They call it the day. She's a Florida girl by birth. She became a lady through her marriage to Lord Treadway, whose family has long protected the island. Nina's heard about, quote, the day, of course. She's heard about the horrific tragedies, the lives that were lost, but she doesn't really believe in it. It's all superstitious nonsense. Stories told to keep newcomers at bay and youngsters in line. Then the day begins. And it's a day of nightmares, of grief, of reckoning. It's also a day of community, of survival and strength, of love, and it's most pure and untamed. When the day ends, Nina and Lute will never be the same. All right. So this is a little misleading because Lute is kind of the same. It's a long-standing tradition. Anyway, so I'm going to get into my thoughts. Like I said earlier, not a fan of this book. The cover, though, that was actually one of the biggest things that drew me in, because originally I thought it was a YA book. Just based on the cover, it has a little bit of a cartoony, beautiful cover. I thought it might have even been a graphic novel, but no, it's not. So that was a huge reason why it drew me in. And I did see a lot of advertisement for this book. So I was like, you know what? It's got to be good. So I checked it out. So there wasn't enough about Lute. Or there was a lot about Lute, like a lot of info dumping, but it didn't feel like it was anything of substance. It's like trying to describe an island, and it's like, we've got grass, we've got dirt, and this is the kind of dirt here, blah, 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 but you don't really know much aside from, like, dirt. I really wanted more about Lute because the whole premise of the story is that we have this old, very, very old sacred tradition, like from the times of Gaul and the Romans, and how they've been doing this for that long, which is a long time. You would think there would be a lot of cool history, especially more ancient Celtic pagan tradition. And I really wanted a lot of that. And I personally really love studying that stuff. So I was really hoping for some more integration on some of the ancient practices, why they needed that sacrifice, and who started this, etc. Like, who are the spirits? Why does it continue to need it? Why hasn't it evolved over time in modern day society? So that was a problem for me. We also have a lot of other crazy shit happening in the story. And I almost feel like it waters Lute down. And I think it was trying to do the opposite. So Lute, like it says in the summary, is that it is this isolated island, and it has this mystical aspect to it that even there's this big war that's happening. And they keep talking about this thing, and there's so much talk of the war that I thought there would be more of that integrated with the story, but it's supposed to be evidence of Lute's weird magical powers of giving good luck to the people, but even though some of the people have to go to war, but the war doesn't actually affect the island, doesn't make sense to me. But there's a lot about this war that's happening in the background. Randomly, there's like maybe the Americans and Russians are fighting against the Europeans and other places in the world, but that doesn't really matter. Like, that's only a foundational part of the book because it just is talking about the current events that are happening in the world and how that affects Lute. Kind of. It's weird. So I wasn't a huge fan of that, and I really wanted more about the island and the ancient aspects of that, the Celtic lore behind all of this. Next, I want to talk about our main character, Nina. Oh, man, I can't stand her. There's no substance there. She was a really absent-minded. She had no idea what was happening. Or she would just blindly ignore things that were just in her face until one event finally happens and it's right in her face. And she's like, okay. I guess I believe that this day is supposed to be a real thing. But she's just so unrelatable and she's dense. She's really dense. And then to turn around, by the way, this future thing I'm going to talk about is a spoiler. To turn it around to make it seem like she has some sort of she can see into the future, like she has these underlying powerful abilities at the very, very end. That really bothers me because she's so unaware the entire time. And she's so focused on all kinds of weird stuff. It's very much saturated in her point of view and her perspective. And I really just wanted to get out of her head. I don't understand creating a character where the whole premise is to understand Lute, this world, this island, and then have the character who's our lens be totally unaware and not even like curious, but she's playing this very stereotypical ditzy American girl, and that also slips in quite often. She's just not a character that I really related to. I just didn't feel like her lens and her perspective was the best one to utilize while trying to explore Lute in the secrets and mysteries and the darkness, and even her character. So it's supposed to be a gothic, atmospheric, folk horror novel. I never felt horrified or scared or felt like there's this ominous thing lurking behind me or in the story. It was just like she just didn't want it to be there. So therefore it wasn't, for the most part, until it was smacking you in the face. And then it was just like, all right, I guess that's where we're going. And that's where the final destination part comes in. Anyway, speaking of Nina, she has her husband, which is mentioned, Lord Hugh Treadway, right off the bat. And granted, okay, so in the very beginning, they're trying to leave the island because Hugh is like, I don't want to be here. This is the anniversary of my father's death. It's also kind of their anniversary as well. And they just want to leave the island. They don't want to be there for this whole experience or anything. And nothing's going right. This is the introduction. And Nina's just like, what's your problem? And I feel bad for Hugh because it's like he's kind of still dealing with this his father died not that long ago. That's a hard thing to deal with, and having your spouse just kind of dismiss it like, well, it is what it is, and I don't believe in this whole island thing. We could just stay here. And that's all fine and dandy, but so we get already in our introduction, Lord Hugh Treadway is already just an enormous douchebag. He is not nice to Nina. He's flippant, he's snappy, he's just demeaning to her. I don't know why they're married, to be perfectly honest. And then even further in the book, Nina even says this, like, this has been our dynamic forever. I just need to be the person that is dependent on you and, all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, this is terrible. So the dynamic between the husband and wife and their background children was awful. It's just a really toxic marriage, and it's really hard to read, and it's hard to be in the perspective of the woman just almost like in complete denial about everything until one event. And this is what happens. All right, so new spoiler. Nina ends up having an affair with some guy who hasn't talked to her for 7 years. So what she thought was that he was bitter about taking his best friend, Lord Hugh Treadway, and not dealing with all of this island drama, the traditions of the island. So she just thought he was cold and short and really crappy and mean to her because of all of these other things associated with the husband, and she had no idea, and they had this really tumultuous relationship, but not really a relationship at all because he would refuse to really talk to her. And you know why? It's because he liked her. That's it. So then all of a sudden, it's not, it doesn't take very long. She's like swept away by this guy who hasn't spoken to her and has been really cold to her like in a day. And she's like a totally different person now because of this circumstance. Just the stuff that happens in her perspective where she's like, the guy's name is Matthew, and she's like, now he's my Maddie, and and I just lust after him, and I'm drinking him in, and I'm just like, oh my God, you were with your husband not that long ago. I don't understand. And it was really just not, it was so freaking confusing. That was a huge just problem. So finally, by about 50 to 60% of this novel, I started to get intrigued during this affair, to be perfectly honest. So that happens around 50 to 60% of the novel. And I was like, what is even happening here? I was so confused. And then we finally get to this climax where all of this stuff starts happening. And this is where all that blood and gore begins to people are just dying all over the place. It's kind of cringeworthy, some parts of this, including the very end between our main character Nina and her husband, Hugh. There's some parts in there how she's dealing with the aftermath or the end of the sacrifices to the island. So it was very frustrating. And then the very, very end, I just did not feel very connected to anybody. I didn't really feel connected to the island. In fact, probably the one thing I wanted was just more depth with the history of the island, the magic behind the island, and why these things happen. And it ended up just being a mess. It wasn't my book. I appreciate you guys listening to my rambling and raving about this novel. I could talk about it for even further. There's a lot of things that I'm really disappointed for so many reasons. This weird war thing drowning out the island was so frustrating. The residents I feel like there's so many different residents on the island that none of them felt like they stood out, and none of them I latched onto. I didn't care about anybody on the island. And worst of all, I didn't even care about our main character. In fact, she was so obnoxious that I was actually kind of hoping that maybe she would be one of the sacrifices at the end. So it's just a little frustrating, and I just didn't feel very satisfied with the book, unfortunately. But I did finish it because I thought, there's got to be something going on here, especially as things started to pick up and people were dying. I was like, okay, maybe we're getting somewhere. But no. Anyway, so I definitely give this book like a 1 out of 5. Unfortunately, I feel awful about it. If you are looking for a book that actually does seem like it's a little more steeped in kind of small community drama, I would say. It does have a really interesting background. The main character wasn't my bag, but it might be something for somebody else. Some people have said that if you enjoyed books like Mark Twain or Nathaniel Hawthorne, where you have that oblivious American kind of dealing with the clash of cultures in Europe, especially aristocratic Europe, and the dynamic there, that was definitely more present than some of the other stuff, like learning more about Celtic mythology and the island, etc. So check out Lute. This is by Jennifer Thorne. If you guys are looking for more dark reads, you can check out our show notes at darksideofthelibrary.com. Join us on our socials at Darkside of the Library, and make sure to check out our Amazon Live channel if you are looking for dark things, items, especially as Christmas starts coming up, at amazon.com/live/Darkside of the Library, and join us for a live stream. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a creep-tastic rest of your week.